The late afternoon light in Nairobi falls across the steps outside a small press hall where rows of cameras and microphones have been hastily arranged. Inside, the air is tense. Rights campaigners and family members have gathered not to celebrate, but to plead for the lives and freedom of two men who, for nearly a week, have been unseen and unheard. Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo, both Kenyan human rights defenders, vanished in Kampala, Uganda, after attending a rally in support of opposition leader Bobi Wine. According to eyewitnesses, they were seized by masked, armed men in broad daylight. That rally had drawn a large crowd of opposition supporters, and as the chants rose in the streets of Kampala, so did the risks for those who stood alongside the opposition.
These two individuals, we are reminding them that they have a responsibility. As there has been one or two positive steps that have been taken compared to where the unlikely events, and I repeat, in the unlikely events that they have, then we need to see them brought before a court of law. And as we say, that people have been very, very vocal on this issue, and they are demanding that action of the permanent secretary be brought to the ministry, to the Uganda.
The same Kenyan government was quite criticized some months ago when he
actively engaging with the Ugandan government in trying to
6 days since the abduction of Kenyan human rights defenders Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo in Kampala, their whereabouts or well-being remain unknown.
At the press briefing in Nairobi, the cameras first captured the head of the Kenyan rights group Vocal Africa. Hussein Khalid looks solemn as he steps forward to the microphones, flanked by other activists. His words set the tone of urgency. 6 days since the abduction of Kenyan human rights defenders Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo in Kampala, their whereabouts or well-being remain unknown. It is a chilling statement, nearly a full week without any sign of the two men, no confirmation of their condition, no access for their families or lawyers. The room grows quieter as Khalid continues, his voice firm but carrying the weight of frustration. The Law Society of Kenya, Vocal Africa and Amnesty International Kenya express deep concern that despite public outrage and ongoing diplomatic engagement, the two remain held incommunicado, a blatant violation of Ugandan, East African and international human rights law. Around the hall, family members sit side by side with campaigners. Some stare at the floor, others fix their gaze on the reporters. The cameras turn toward a man in a neat shirt, clasping his hands tightly before speaking. This is Norbert Ochieng, the brother of Nicholas Oyoo. His voice trembles only slightly as he addresses the journalists and, indirectly, his own government. We plead with the government of Kenya to intervene and secure the immediate and unconstitutional release of our brothers Nicholas and Bob. Their continued detention violates the regional and international human rights standards, including protection under the East African Community Treaty, the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights, the UN Convention Against Enforced Disappearance. Ochieng's plea is not just a call for diplomacy, it is a personal cry for help. The faces in the room reveal that this story is no longer about abstract principles of law, but about fathers, brothers and sons whose lives have been interrupted by a vanishing act that, in the eyes of those gathered, carries the clear fingerprints of state repression. Hussein Khalid later expands on that suspicion. Speaking again, he does not mince words. Eyewitness accounts indicate that Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo were abducted in Kampala by masked, uniformed and armed men, suggesting strong evidence of state involvement in their disappearance. It is our suspicion that the two may be detained alongside other Ugandan political detainees in military facilities. The claim, while not proven in court, adds a layer of gravity. It shifts the incident from a possible random act of abduction to one that many see as politically motivated, part of a broader crackdown on dissent.
The Law Society of Kenya, Vocal Africa, and Amnesty International Kenya express deep concern that despite public outrage and ongoing diplomatic engagement, the two remain held incommunicado, a blatant violation of Ugandan, East African, and international human rights law. Eyewitness accounts indicate that Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo were abducted in Kampala by masked, uniformed, and armed men, suggesting strong evidence of state involvement in their disappearance. It is our suspicion that the two may be detained alongside other Ugandan political detainees in military facilities.
The involvement of regional and international organisations underscores the seriousness of the case. Juniper Wanjiru, the East Africa country campaigner for Amnesty International, raises a wider alarm that this is not an isolated incident. Her words reflect both concern and exasperation. There's been a very worrying trend of cross-border repression that we're seeing across the whole region. We've seen it in Kenya with Kizza Besigye. We saw it in Tanzania with Boniface Mwangi and Agatha Atuhaire. And now in Uganda, we are seeing it with Bob and with Nicholas. At the end of the day, what is happening with these governments is that they are pushing for a chilling effect of fear, which is really, really worrying as we go to the elections in Tanzania at the end of October and in Uganda in January. That phrase, a chilling effect of fear, hangs heavy in the air. For campaigners, it suggests not merely an attack on two individuals, but a calculated tactic to deter others from speaking up, to dampen political opposition, and to intimidate communities across borders. As the press conference continues, the cameras capture rows of journalists scribbling notes, clicking shutters, exchanging glances. They know that this case touches on more than the fate of two Kenyan activists. It illuminates the fragility of civil liberties in parts of East Africa, the strain between neighbours who share borders, but not always political values, and the growing challenge faced by human rights defenders in the region. In the days since their abduction, neither Bob Njagi nor Nicholas Oyoo has been produced in any Ugandan court. Their families have had no contact with them. Rights groups have petitioned both the Kenyan and Ugandan governments, urging them to account for the two men's safety and to ensure that due process is followed. But the silence has persisted. This silence is precisely what worries those gathered in Nairobi. As Hussein Khalid pointed out, detentions that happen outside the rule of law, without charge, without access to lawyers or relatives, raise the risk of abuse. Activists warn that the longer such detentions continue in secrecy, the higher the danger to the individuals held and the greater the erosion of trust between states and their citizens. The political backdrop cannot be ignored. Uganda has in the past been accused by human rights watchdogs of using security forces to suppress opposition movements, especially in the run-up to elections. The presence of Bobi Wine at the rally attended by Njagi and Oyoo is itself a sign of that tense political season. In Kenya, rights groups have grown increasingly vocal about the responsibility of their own government to protect citizens abroad, particularly those engaged in legitimate political advocacy. The voices at this press conference echo beyond the walls of the Nairobi Hall. They speak to ordinary families worried that political engagement can bring not just harassment, but disappearance. They speak to regional leaders faced with growing calls to honour the treaties and charters they have signed. They speak to voters in neighbouring countries who will soon be heading to the polls in climates already fraught with suspicion and fear.
We plead with the government of Kenya to intervene and secure the immediate and unconstitutional release of our brothers, Nicholas and Bob. Their continued detention violates the regional and international human rights standards, including protection under the East African Community Treaty, the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights, the UN Convention Against Enforced Disappearances.
As the conference ends, the cameras continue to follow the activists and family members as they step away from the podium. Their statements have been delivered. Now they return to the harder part, waiting, hoping for news, for some sign that their words will reach the ears of those who hold power over the fate of Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo. The story is not just about two missing men. It is about the resilience of civil society in the face of repression. It is about the unbroken chain of regional solidarity, from lawyers to campaigners to families, insisting that the principles enshrined in the African Charter on Human Rights and in international law must not remain abstract promises. It is about the idea that citizenship should not stop at a border when rights are at stake. For the families of the two activists, every passing hour without information is an agony. For the campaigners, every day without accountability is a warning that the norms they defend are under threat. The voices captured in Nairobi carry not just demands for justice, but an urgent appeal that the disappearances of Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo not be allowed to fade into another unmarked chapter of political repression.
There's been a very worrying trend of cross-border repression that we're seeing across the whole region. We've seen it in Kenya with Kizza Besigye, we saw it in Tanzania with Boniface and Agatha, and now in Uganda we are seeing it with Bob and with Nicholas. At the end of the day, what is happening with this government is that they are pushing for a chilling effect of fear, which is really, really worrying as we go to the elections in Tanzania in October, the end of October, and in Uganda in January.